Blog Talk Radio.
Archangels, ghosts, and Bigfoot, oh my. It's just another night for Supernatural Girls. Real stories, real answers to life's biggest supernatural mysteries. And now, for another exciting interview with paranormal experts from this world and others. Here's your host, paranormal researcher Patricia Baker, on the one, the only, Supernatural Girls.
Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of Supernatural Girls Radio. I'm your host, Patricia Baker. I am here with my co-host, PK, Patricia Kirkman. How you doing tonight?
Absolutely fabulous. We're going to get some rain. I can't wait. It's been so long.
Lucky you.
Oh, yeah. Even the cactus are limping over. Everything is so dry here.
Well, you need that rain, so it's good it's coming your way.
Oh, desperately. I know how to get operating from now on. I got flood insurance this year. That's why. That's what happened.
Okay, you're all set. You are all set. Well, tonight,
Lord.
as you know, we have one of your friends on with us who we've been so excited to speak with, Jeff Harman. He's a Vedic astrologer and more. We're going to hear his predictions and insights for what's going to hit us in 2021. But first, we want to find out from you, PK. What do you think's happening with the numbers? We know it's still crazy times. 2020, I don't think is behind us yet.
No, it's dragging backside, but for sure. But you know, we're in a 6 month, and it's all about being the service to others. And instead of letting ourselves get all caught up in things, don't neglect yourself right now. Helping other people is very important. But it's time to nurture yourself, because if you don't listen to you, why is anybody else going to listen to you? The emphasis is going to be on the family, love, pets, things of that nature. But give yourself some love and some laughter, because that's really necessary now. And one of the things, because we've been through so much stress, everybody's a little uptight. Let's do something about breathing. It's the most important gift we have to ourselves. Conscious, deep breathing is one of the simplest ways to calm and integrate the mind and the body. Meditation's important, but you're always, next time you do these deep breathings, if you don't take time to really inhale, let it out, become aware of it, because it's easier the more you do it, the deeper it gets. And then you might feel that you're going to be extremely less tired. We're exhausted because we're all so stressed. Focus on your attention on the breath, the beginning, when you meditate, anything like that, anytime you have time alone, practice that deep breathing. It's going to loosen everything up and make you feel a lot better. So that's my little tidbit for the right now. Calm yourself, your mind, and your body.
That is great advice. We all need some serenity because we haven't seen much of it in quite some time. So
that is for sure.
We need to walk down the serenity road, I think. So also, for everybody that wants to read about more UFO sightings, and I feel like I say this every week, but it's true, more and more people are seeing UFOs in the sky, taking videos and reporting on it. And these are legitimate sightings. Some of them have been investigated by MUFON, and others have had multiple witnesses. So, I think it's really amazing how many people are having these types of experiences. I also heard from a fellow podcaster, Jojo, who had somebody talk to him about an entity that's following them around, and they see it all the time. So, as we've said, the veil gets thinner and thinner, and more of these things are going to be turning up. And we've certainly also heard that as a prediction, that more and more will be coming through from the other dimensions in much more solid form. So, all very interesting things going on in our world today. And yes, we need that serenity. And tonight, we have your friend, very dear friend of yours, Jeff Harman, is joining us tonight. Now, he's going to lead us through 2021 and what is going to get thrown at us now. We are going to find out We're also going to talk to him about Jeffrey Epstein. Is Jeffrey Epstein still alive? And there's also been rumors of John F. Kennedy Jr. And guess what? Jeff has the information on all of this. Now, he is a second-generation astrologer, and he can do readings for you for everything, on your personal side, on your business side. He's got 45 years of experience, and he is a master of classical, Vedic, and Kabbalistic astrology. And he also draws from many other traditions of spiritual knowledge for clearing people and property of unwanted energies. And he's also a consultant for paranormal investigations. And he's here with us tonight. So, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh, we're lucky to have you with us, for sure.
I know.
Especially today. We all need something to get us going.
We need some hand-holding. So.
It's been crazy times, hasn't it?
Oh, yes, indeed. It really has. So, not sure where to start, but I know you have a lot of insights about what is going to be happening for us in 2021. So where would you like to start?
Well, it's interesting. Today was the inauguration, and I really thought Trump had a shot, especially last year, and then it looked like he had a shot from November 3rd. But I got to tell you, when January 6th happened, everything shifted. I really think he made a mistake doing that rally at the Capitol, and not that I'm here to castigate him or anything like that, but I think he had a shot. And when that happened, they used that against him. And I know we've all heard, Antifa could have been involved, and special forces, all that. And that really doesn't matter. I think he really shot himself in the foot a little bit there when he did that rally, because Pence basically did the turn on him. And then when the Capitol incident happened, no matter what you believe about how it happened, it kind of backfired. And I actually was asked several times. I went radio silence after that, because I basically kept getting he had a really narrow shot after that, really narrow. And, it's interesting, you guys talk about paranormal and stuff like that. When you're dealing with global events like this, because I think this situation now with Biden being signed isn't just affecting the United States, it's globally affecting everyone. And everyone I speak to all over the world is just like, they're as depressed as many of the Americans I speak to. They're like, wow, you guys were the kind of firewall for what they, viewed as global kind of freedom. And now I think a lot of people have lost faith in what is happening, not only in the United States, but in their own countries because of this. And, it's really a tough situation, because a lot of people view this as now that the Democrats have not only got the White House, they have all branches of government. They have it lock, stock, and barrel. But I think on a bigger picture, my favorite guy, George Carlin, I always wave to George's office when I go by in Brentwood. I drive by there all the time, and I say, George, we miss you. We need you back.
Yeah, we
do.
Bring
you back here.
Sure.
Could you imagine if he was alive right now, what he would say? Oh, my God.
Oh, my God. Having a field day.
Yeah. But, his skit that he did on HBO way back, now many years ago, I think it was like in 2005 or 2006, where he basically talked about the American dream, and he really nailed so much stuff in that more accurately than I think he even knew. And I had the opportunity of knowing George. I actually got to record him in the studio a couple of times, wow. And it was really, amazing to meet him. He was such a sharp individual. I mean, much, much smarter than he got credit for. I would have loved to have given George an IQ test. I don't think he would have rung the bell. I think he would have dented the bell. And he basically said,
that says a lot.
I remember when I first met him, his office manager, Ross Davis, introduced me. Jeff, this is George. Hey, George, nice to meet you. And he just looked at me. I felt like I was being scanned rather than just looked at. I said, okay, this guy just scanned me. So, but he was really a nice guy, personally. And long story short, what I want to get to is he said, we have owners. Forget the politicians. And I think he's right. This war that we just witnessed, I think, this whole last year with this election, is much bigger than Trump and Biden. It's about the globalists and the nationalists. And I hate to say it, but right now it's looking like the globalists won. And they kind of won across the board. And, a lot of people have said, Jeff, do you really think the election was really rigged? And I have to say, by the astrology, and again, I'm not trying to put my personal bias in here, I would say absolutely. I mean, Mercury was retrograde 3 weeks before the election, and then it stationed election day. For anybody that doesn't know what Mercury retrograde means, I mean, that's pretty much when everything gets all screwed up. Technically, anything to do with computers and networking and paperwork and all that stuff. Can't think of a better way. And a lot of people say these folks on the other side are also using astrology or are being aware of it. It was the perfect storm because Mercury retrograded on election night and went direct, squaring Saturn. Well, again, to sum this all up, I think somebody at the top of the pyramid has made a decision and put the heat on this, and really it's the bankers behind the government. I think it was Rothschild that rightly said, he said, I don't care who makes the laws, give me control of the money, and that's it. We own this place. And Woodrow Wilson is the man who handed it over to him. And he really did. In fact, Woodrow Wilson is reported to have said that on his deathbed, that, hey, I gave my country away. And he did. And where we're at right now is, I think, kind of a scary place. And, we were all talking before the show, before we came on live, and I was mentioning that I've been actually holding back on something because I'm a real positive person. I always love to tell people, positive things and look at the upside of everything. And I still do. But the United States, the Declaration of Independence chart has some really challenging energies coming up over this next few years. And when I say challenging, I'm talking like the Civil War had the same energy 180 years ago. But the difference now is, for the first time ever, we have a Pluto return. Pluto takes about 240 to 248 years, it's not exact, about to go around the, you could say, solar system. And its return, when we say a return, that means if you take the time of the Declaration of Independence and the location of Pluto in that kind of birth chart, if you will, which concretized the energy, the 244 years that has elapsed will actually make Pluto return to the United States Pluto over this next 2 years. People might say, okay, cool, what the heck does that mean? Well, Pluto is all about raw power. I know they've demoted her from being a planet to a planetoid. Now they've stuck it back in the planet, box. My experience of Pluto, especially in location astrology, when people live on it or you have transits, it's exceedingly powerful. It may be little, but, C4 comes in small packages too. It's mighty. And it really seems to pack a punch in everyone's life. And no one, of course, will ever live long enough to have a Pluto return, because you'd have to be 240 years old, so only a country can do that. So the United States, by 2023, probably not going to be the United States we know now. It's either going to transform in a very, very positive way or a very, very unpositive way. But Pluto seems to never take prisoners. It's very thorough in its transformative powers. And what's disturbing is, starting this March, for any of you who know astrology, we have Neptune squaring the United States Mars. Then we have Neptune opposing it 3 times this year. You might say, why 3 times? Well, Neptune's direct, it'll station, turn around and go retrograde, and then this summer it comes back again. So it basically does this 3 times throughout this year. And you might say, well, what does it mean? Well, see, it happens March, right at the end of March through April, and then it comes back again, opposing Neptune in August and squaring Mars again in September, and it finishes January through February of 2022. Neptune always rules either higher spiritual psychic stuff, and you guys mentioned, the possibility of things bleeding through from the other dimensions has a lot to do with Neptune. And it's psychic, weird, paranormal stuff. Moreover, it's subterfuge, delusion, and fraud and collusion when it's mixed up with the intensity of Mars. So I hope I'm wrong. This could go two ways. It could also be the exposure of that stuff, and it might be a little bit of both, where we see continuous attempts to undo the situation that was just inaugurated today, or we see them really pouring on the gas on their agenda to basically do some very, very subterfuge type stuff, that like a lot of executive orders being passed, and again with the Senate and the House all together, it's pretty easy to rubber stamp that stuff when you got that kind of power. So, I'm not trying to be the bearer of disturbing and bad news, but I would say if there was ever a time that this shows up, it's certainly now. The world as we know it, or the country as we know it, is likely to go through some drastic issues over this next 2 years. It doesn't wrap up until 2023.
Now, when you talk about these squares and all of these other events that you see coming in 2021, are you also talking about the possibility of an international conflict, a war?
It could. And see, that's, again, the confusion, delusion, and all that. I mean, we were talking, and Patricia, I had said, I've now lived through 13 presidents from Eisenhower forward. You've lived from back to, FDR, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Now, talk about confusion and delusion. You may like FDR, you may hate him, but I know I was shown that the bankers who run this Treasury Department, which is not the government, it's the people behind it, actually funded Hitler and they funded Japan. And I didn't believe it. And then he said, well, look at all these Ruhr gas bonds, Rheinable using bonds, all these utility bonds that were issued to the Republic of Germany from 1933-35 forward. Guess when they were callable? 1945. And Japan, we loaned them millions of dollars. Back in the 30s, they bought all the steel from our steel mills, and then they shot it back at us. So this is the kind of stuff you see that the international banking community, who doesn't care because they make money no matter who wins or loses, tends to do. This is something I wouldn't be surprised if something on that order of magnitude would happen this year and into next. We cast a chart just before the show, and you had asked, would there be a potential of that? And it does kind of come up like it could. And I hope it doesn't. Yeah. Because I believe that God is above astrology. We're above astrology, believe it or not. A lot of modern astrologers run around and they all tell you, you're a Pisces or an Aries. And that's one of the first things I do in my readings is tell people, you're not your astrology, but you're heavily influenced by it. It's the reason the ancients say we were born is to purify and rectify the soul through its karma. So we're not our astrology, but we certainly are affected by it. I mean, we can't control the parents we were conceived by. We certainly cannot control the formative years of our lives. We're completely subject to the environment our parents provide, whether they drop us off in a shopping basket at the police department, or they raise us, whatever they do. So,
yeah, exactly.
Kind of like the tramp, remember, with
So along with these conflicts, these potential conflicts that are coming up, and it sounds like we may be also facing severe restraint on our rights. And you talk about all these executive orders, which certainly did start today.
Yeah, I mean, the executive orders are being rubber stamped as we speak. And, clearly, once the COVID thing's over, they're going to open the borders. They're going to flood this place. And even though you and I pay for our health care, they're going to get it free. And, it's pretty much an exercise in insanity what why they'd want to do that, unless they're trying to break the entire middle class and convert us to socialism, or better yet, outright communism.
Mm-hmm.
And, I always say to people, they go, well, they can't keep printing money, that there's no way they can collateralize it. And I ask them, well, if the Western financial system is probably way over $100 trillion in debt now already, you know anybody who's got that kind of collateral? Any bank? Nobody does.
Yeah, right.
Here's a little mathematical exercise for you. At 40 years old, you're just a little over 1 billion seconds old. I couldn't believe it. I did the calculator. And then at 80, you're about 2 billion seconds old. Guess how long 1 trillion seconds is? Just take a guess.
That's crazy.
Oh, my God.
But Jeff, I've got a question for you.
It's 11,700 years. So for anybody listening, if anyone thinks that a bank has that kind of collateral, they're printing money. And people say they can't keep doing it. Yes, they can.
Sure they can.
They are.
Because who's going to stop them? Who's going to stop them?
Right. So this all makes a lot of sense. But I do have a question for you, since you've got all the charts in front of you, and I do believe you were correct when you said Trump was going to win. You were one of 3 astrologers we had on who all said the same thing. I think it was very hard to account for all of the voter fraud and the Dominion machines and things like that occurred. But here's the more spiritual question I have for you that maybe you can enlighten all of us about, because, and I'm not even saying it's about Biden or Trump or any of that kind of thing. I'm talking about love versus hate. I'm talking about light versus darkness. What I saw, and if I just sit back and put on my sociology hat, what did I see? I saw with President Trump that he inspired a lot of love and devotion. People loved him. People turned up for his rallies in the tens of thousands. And if you go by what was true on the Dominion machines, and according to some of the reports I've read, he had 410 electoral votes. So he had the bulk of the voters voting for him. Some people say even flipped California. So here's all this outpouring of love. And I watched this kind of outpouring of love also expand into the crowd. So I'm watching the crowds, and I'm seeing people of all different colors, all different nationalities, all different religions coming to be with this movement. And it was a movement that really looked to me like it came from an open heart. It came from wanting to see everybody in the country on a path with an internal moral compass. Now, to me, that all sounds really good. And it felt really good. I love seeing love in a crowd. And yet, when it came down to the wire, this backfired. Why?
Sure did. It sure
Why
did.
did that happen?
Well, maybe it's what we're seeing in the United States chart. The owners are taking it in one direction, and Trump didn't want to take it in that direction. I still think there's a war going on behind the scenes. And, there's many people who are speaking right now about many different things. Like Sidney Powell had said, Trump is not listening to the right people, and he's not taking action, doing the right things. And it's interesting. I had a couple of clients ask questions in the last week or two, and it almost looks like a man, meaning Trump, had a knife to his throat, metaphorically, or to one of his loved ones. It's like great forces of pressure were put upon him to back down. Mm-hmm. Not that I'm saying he is backing down, but he was told to stand down because, there seems to be a lot of evidence that I have heard is available with not only the voting machines, but the satellites over in Europe, particularly the
owned by the
Rome,
Vatican,
Italy, Vatican, that's right. All kinds of stuff that we could go on and on. Everybody's been hearing about it, but yet it's like everyone's saying that doesn't matter. And you see this a lot. This is nothing new. I mean, when you go back to even thousands of years, and you hear about, just watch Braveheart. William Wallace might have been right, but he still got drawn in court and put it on the four corners of England. And then yet, forward of that, they won their freedom. Well, that may be something that happens here, is that ultimately this gets enough people to do something about it over this next couple of years. And again, astrology does not predict the future. It certainly is highly indicative of very powerful energies that you can get the range of what's going to happen. And I think this is going to come down to collectively some brave people being able to do something and present some things who aren't, having their kids dangled off the top of a skyscraper and threats, that actually can do something. It could turn out a better way in the next couple of years. America has had some crazy people running this place. It's interesting. I was, over the years, I was at Tucson Air Museum, and they had the Air Force One that had brought Kennedy back. And I remember as a little kid, I was standing out in the yard when Kennedy got shot. And the interesting thing was I went on that Air Force One. In fact, I was actually going to have a law firm hire me to do some forensics work on the acoustics and visuals, physics-wise, because time equals the distance divided by velocity. We were going to actually prove that there were more than one guns at one location. And that funding got pulled so fast, and I never met an attorney who was more resolved to make it happen, and he mysteriously backed off that. It's like 9/11 and all these other things. There's so much subterfuge behind it. There's a secret government, and I'm not so sure it's not like Men in Black that it's behind the scenes, and it's really interesting, the forces that guide the direction of countries and world events like this, and it's far deeper than I think any of us will ever fully know.
Well,
but I went on that Air Force One. Go ahead.
It's just very dangerous. I mean, anybody who tries to stand up to it, look what happened to John F. Kennedy, as you're talking about the physics of the assassination. And that just brings me to one other question for you regarding this topic, because there was a lot talked about over the last few months, and I think even before that, about John F. Kennedy Jr. having faked his death and still being alive. Now, it makes sense because he was running in the Senate against Hillary, and we all know that track record. There is no way she could have defeated him.
Now, wait a minute. Hillary would never do anything like that.
Right.
Bill would do it for her.
But again, for people who may not know about this from back then, some of the younger people in our audience, he was, John F. Kennedy Jr. was the prince. There would be no stopping him in running for any office he wanted. People would just, Republican, Democrat, wouldn't have mattered. He would have won. And 3 days later, after he's announced this, all of a sudden they claim his plane crashed, his wife's dead, he's dead,
How about that?
His sister's dead. How about it? Yeah. So then all of this information PK and I were looking at over the last few months was that people were saying he is in fact alive. He faked his death with the help of President Trump, and he knew he was going to be the next hit, so he decided to do this instead. So you said you knew some information about this, so tell us what you know.
Well, I only know this, that I had a client ask about that, and Camille actually asked me that as well, and I cast an interrogation chart, and it leaned in a direction, and I know this sounds incredible because we've all seen the documentary with the plane and the seats at the bottom of the ocean, and they did all this, but they didn't show any bodies. And, of course, they'll drop back to, yes, but it was too gruesome. But I got that is a strong probability he is still around. And I know that sounds, outlandish to some people, but that's what I got. And he could be Fusca. He really could. And that and that's another interesting thing. I just had a client tell me today that in New York, that it was reported someone saw Trump in Florida today when he got off the plane, and he and Melania were super happy, like really happy. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. There's more going on than we know. And with this strange astrology going on, and again, the trigger points are going to be March through April, actually March through May, and again, August through the end of September, and then again at the end of this year. Expect the unexpected. expect something bizarre, off the charts, that is going to be a little bit like a Twilight Zone episode, which could range anything from they do more subterfuge and get away with it, or something comes out in the middle of this year that really could open up a can of worms for them. And this is going to be interesting because we got a front row seat. This energy has not been present for the United States since the Civil War. But unlike the Civil War, this Pluto return that's all kicking in 2022 through 2023 is absolutely really powerful. And in Vedic astrology, the United States is in a 28-year cycle known as Sati Sate, which is a strange term that means Saturn is transiting the sign before, during, and after the moon of the country, which is very intense. That means a lot of old karmic energy comes to roost. And again, the internet is a hard thing to bridle. They can shut us off of all these other channels, but they're not going to be able to shut everybody down. And I hear he's starting a TV station. He got some kind of approval on that. So it's going to be really interesting to see where this all goes this year. The astrology says it's going to be like a Twilight Zone episode.
And to add to that, the numerology aspect,
PK.
This is a year of major change. And it certainly has been that, the unexpected. So we've got that until the end of the year. So add that to what you're already talking about, Jeff, kind of like a shake, rattle, and roll. We're like a piñata.
It's going to be a roller coaster ride, even more so than I think we've seen it in the last 4 years, much more so. This is going to be bizarre. There is some positive to this too. Like also Jupiter dances over the United States moon 3 times this year. That also commences in April. That's why there may be some very positive outcomes out of this when it's all said and done. Mm-hmm. We just got to wait it out and see. Very, very powerful stuff, I think, going on at a very high level. This is a battle between the globalists and the nationalists.
So I just got a text question from one of our listeners, and they want to know, because there was so much talked about that Trump was going to use the insurrection order and do martial law and arrest all these criminals that had been identified and clean up the swamp as he promised, but that obviously did not happen. So they want to know, is he still possibly going to be involved in this somehow and then have the second term that so many prophets did predict, like she just referenced Kim Clement talking about there would be 2 terms for Trump. And do you see that anywhere?
I really did last year. Ever since, for some strange reason, that event that got pulled on the 6th, and it wasn't just Mike Pence, it was the energy really shifted there. I don't know what he was thinking to do that rally. I mean, it's great that everybody wanted to come, but I don't see any purpose whatsoever for it. And he opened up a window that they're going to still try and come after him with. I'll be surprised if they don't try and impeach him yet. Even though he's out of office, I don't know what they're going to gain. But they're trying
it's unconstitutional, but what do they care about that? But, yeah, you're right. I mean, it did seem like an odd thing to do because it was like walking into a trap. And at the same time, the FBI did come out and say this was a pre-planned event. We had National Public Radio publishing an article about it 9 a.m. that day, hours before this even happened. So there were a lot of things that they were sloppy about, and it outed them in a big way. But yet, these people seem to need something to beat up the president with. I don't know if it goes beyond.
He gave them the opportunity. That's the shame. I just wish he wouldn't have done it, because he really shot himself in the foot there. I think he would have had a really strong chance had he not done that, because you saw everyone, even the people he was handing microphones to in Georgia. And that was another thing, that Georgia runoff. I mean, folks, you just played a game on a tilted crap table with weighted dice, and then you go do it again?
Exactly.
I mean, what kind of insanity?
Point.
Right.
I mean,
why did they
I
even
just couldn't
do
get
that?
it. Well, that's why I wonder, the more I looked at it, going forward, if he wasn't told or forced in some way that we don't know of, that last broadcast he gave, he looked like he lost 7 pounds. I mean, he's really. I think, you're not dealing with nice people here.
Oh, that's for
this
sure.
is way past Goodfellas. You're talking about people who will do some pretty gruesome things, and I'm not so sure he wasn't really told to stand down. And again, this is at a level way above the politics. You're dealing with people in the international world, or you could say at that level, that's the government above the government, the one who really runs things. And I think this is intertwined with some very, very powerful and dark forces that have been running things for a long time. And that's what happened. I think he might have been viewed as a rogue at the last minute, and that's it. We made a decision. We're going to put Slide Biden in. And by the way, I looked at Joe Biden's chart, and I still maintain his chart is not that strong. Whose is Kamala Harris. I really, for the first time today, because of your show, I've been so busy with clients, I haven't really looked at her in detail. But today I pulled her up and did a deep analysis on her. I can see why she's probably going to be the president very soon. In fact, I would be surprised if by next year, about this time, or the latest would be the fall of 2022, Harris isn't in the presidency.
I would be surprised if she's not in before. I mean, because he can't string two words together.
I kept getting
he can't tie his shoes.
Well,
though he did okay today. He only smuffed it 1 or 2 times, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure they're pumping him up with something pretty good. But I would tell you, Harris actually has the secondary progressed moon in her 10th house. I was really shocked to see that today. Before getting on the show, I went, wow, Harris really has the strength here to carry the torch, and I really think that's where it's going to end up. And Kamala Harris, I don't want to say anything good or bad about anybody here, but I can tell you she'll probably do whatever the owners tell her to do. And I think after we saw JFK get his hair cut back in '63, most presidents will. And I think Trump was rogue. I think he actually really was the kind of guy who wouldn't take directives. He really was running the presidency as a president. And JFK himself actually stood up before he was shot and said that. If you remember, he said, it appears the presidency, the office of the presidency is being used for something it wasn't intended for. And he was alluding to, his inability to exercise his true powers. And I think Trump was doing that, and that's why they wanted him out, the owners, at the top of the pyramid, because he would have done what they didn't want him to do. Right.
Because, again, this is, like you said, these are forces of tremendous darkness. And when people talk about these folks being involved in satanic worship and things like that, I have no doubt that they are, just some of them, and that's not all of them, because these are very dark and dense energies.
Yep.
And very threatening. I could imagine, as you're talking about this, that they could have threatened Trump's family. Maybe threatening him wasn't the issue.
It looks like they did. That's what I got. It looks like Trump, when I did the interrogations, he was besieged between Saturn and Pluto, which means they had him up against the wall with something really intense. And I'm quite sure it would be his wife's family, or all of them. Who knows?
I'm sure.
That's an easy thing to do. The plane crashed today with all the Trumps on it. I mean, and he's had attempts on his life already. They thwarted it when he was in the presidency. I mean, I think he's been told to stand down by the owners. That's what I get.
You're probably right, because it's not this behavior that we saw in the last, 2 weeks. It's not typical of him.
Nope. It from the 6th forward, that's what blew it. I just can't fathom why he did that rally. I mean, I was just scratching my head going, what are you doing? If this was 1912, okay, that would have been great. We could march to the Capitol. But today, with cameras and media, I mean, wherever you point a high-def camera, that's reality right now. And they backfired it on him. He literally opened himself up to a trap there. and he took it.
Exactly.
He took the bait.
It's too bad. It's too bad. And it is, again, I think it was coming from a place of love, that the people love him, he loves them. It's like, come be with me in Washington, without even thinking how it would be used by these nefarious sources and try to set him up as if
he's a gambler, though. That's
the
bottom line. He has to gamble.
That's
he always does.
This is like a really nasty street fight. They don't care how they win. They'll kick you in the groin. They'll punch you below the belt. They'll have a dog run up and bite you in the back, and 3 people throwing rocks at your head while they punch you out. They don't care. That's the game he was playing, and I wish he'd have been a little bit more cognizant of that with that rally, because that's what they did. They snuffed him right there, and everything in the chart before that looked like he had a good shot, and it really changed after that. And that's what's interesting about interrogation astrology is I find on individuals it's really accurate, but when you're talking about global directions like this, there's so many interconnecting forces that are really high level here, and I'm not talking just human, that are very powerful. And I just think he got trapped. That's what happened. He went the wrong way. And Biden's in now. I mean, he's in. And Harris they'll do whatever they tell them to do. That they will. In fact, they know. I was always told that there was a little movie they played for every president, and it was the JFK assassination. That could be you. I think Trump Trump just was too much of a rogue for them, and he didn't play hard enough to make it work. Let's see what happens. This is going to be a year of years coming up. This next 2 years, like we've never seen ever, because now we're not dealing with the Civil War, and these same energies are here. We're dealing with extreme advanced technologies. Like everyone thinks, because they have a firewall, that they're not going to be tracked. If you have an internet service provider, if you have a smartphone of any kind, you are being tracked. They're not having people sit in cubicles. They have algorithms and computer farms. Every text, you're psychologically profiled. You are categorized as probable this, probable that. They don't care what shoes you buy. They care who you are, what you do, and what you have, and what your probabilities are. And that's every single person who has got any kind of technology at all is profiled beyond our wildest imaginations. And they don't need FISA to do it. I mean, this is at a level way above the government. And I've heard this has been going on like enemy of the estate for years, and it's really increased since the 2000s forward. And that data is there for profiling. And if it's misused, which we're already seeing the effects of what could happen if it is, you could get something that makes 1984 look like a cakewalk.
It really does. It's very upsetting. Now, you also were able to do a chart on the mysterious Jeffrey Epstein. What did you find with that?
Thumbs up, he's not dead. I do not buy that that was him they drug out of there. And don't they always put people in a body bag and cover the head? And to the skeptics, I say, even William Barr, was also the owners told to stand down. I can tell you that doesn't look like he was taken out. I think he slipped out the back.
So do you think he's living some happy life somewhere, or is he still being held in custody?
I don't know if it's happy, but it certainly doesn't look like he's gone. I don't know. I don't have a snappy answer to that one. That one's murky. I would think, there may be something that they're trying to get him to produce more. I don't know why. They already have his madam. They got everything they need. See, this is the problem. When you look at all of this, the Supreme Court, they tie their hands behind their backs. They're not allowing all the chains of command, the FBI, the CIA, Department, NSA, all of them. I mean, they're all over at CNN getting checks to tell us how to hate Orange Man. And that's why I call CNN Hate Orange Man News. And
right, that's
now
a good name for them.
Biden
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, Biden now, he's going to end up with lipstick marks on his rear end because the press is going to, just be smooching him there so much. And
That's right.
it's really a shame, but
it is. But I'll
welcome
tell you,
to
I was just
our
reading
reality.
an article before we came on the air that, the White House, when Trump was there, had just tens of millions of people following his Twitter account. And as soon as he left, the White House account with Biden in charge dropped by millions.
Yeah.
It's now down to 2 million. So people aren't behind him. They just voted for him because they didn't like Trump, which was really, in my opinion, it's not a really logical reason to vote for anybody. But that's, you could never find out, well, what is it you like about Biden? They couldn't answer that question. So it always had to be something bad about Trump, which was unfortunate because that fed more divisiveness, more hate, more distrust, that we're feeling now today. But let me ask you another question, because you're talking about the Twilight Zone moments that we're going to experience. And we've talked about disclosure for a long time on this show, and we've watched very closely the new PR movement coming out of the military with UAPs instead of UFOs, and
right.
dribble this crap out to us about, well, now we can tell you, yes, this was, we don't know where it came from, and we're supposed to get a Pentagon report on all of that happy horse shit. But what I want to know is what you see in the stars about this. Is this going to be disclosed, or is it just going to happen and they won't be able to hide it?
More the latter, if I'm reading it right. I don't get they're just going to land on a White House lawn and introduce them. I think it's just going to dribble out more without any official rubber stamp on it. They it's interesting you're bringing all this up because there was a little something Obama did back in 2000. I think it was 14 or 16. I think it was 16. He introduced a really complex bill that was called the H.R. 4310, and buried somewhere deep in there was the ability for news to become opinion news, which actually allowed military-type psyops to be used on us. And when you look at all these news media outlets, this is not news. This is, you ask a loaded question, hire someone that will give you the perfect answer, and that becomes a new reality. Well, this is the same thing I'm seeing with the UFO situations, is they're going to keep blowing stardust up our rear ends and tell us it's raining. And I really think that's more with the, I'm surprised they don't have the neuralizers yet, folks. Just look over here. Poof, now go home, smile, and love your present. And it's almost like that, because you talk to people in this country, they're so polarized. Well, who really did that? The media was so instrumental in that. And
absolutely.
It's pretty much insane. I mean, if you watch most of the mainstream media, it's hate Orange Man news. You must hate him. I want you to hate him. See, that gets into a subject I've been studying a lot, and I love this. You may have heard of the Nadi palm leaves in India. Well, this is actually called Nadi Astrology. It's Naadi, and it's all about the consciousness in these meat suits we call bodies. And what's profound is how accurately it shows the parents we're born to, the events in our life, the ebbs and the flows that go up and down. And I wish I would have studied this 45 years ago. I really do. I've been on this now. I got exposed to it about 20-something years ago, and it has just enraptured me really strong the last 4 or 5 years, and especially this last couple of years. I've been really just conversing and studying all kinds of these ancient documents, and I've been getting stuff in from India, and it's really fascinating because what it talks about is exactly what we are talking about, the illusion of the perception of reality. Not that reality is an illusion, but in a lot of ways, this is where cults, this is where advanced people know belief is a very dangerous thing, because we use deductive reasoning. We use logic and emotion. And, of course, the mysterious forces that we can't touch is the karmic energies that impinge upon our souls that really is shown very well in Nadi astrology. Well, this relates to what we're talking about, UFOs, the real unveiling of this kind of what I call the soul matrix here. I always say, forget Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus. This may really be a true matrix place for the soul to come and purify and rectify. And you see these beautiful forces here. We see creation and the babies and the birds and the amazing stuff in nature and the wonders of the planet and in society as well. But then we also see this really heavy dark side, and we see others going through stuff that's really dark, and somehow a lot of people seem to miss it, thank God. And I think there's forces here that are always going to make it better than it would be. Like, speaking of UFOs, I've actually sat in meetings in MUFON and various places. I used to remember George Parks, Patricia?
Yes.
I do not.
Yes.
Do you, PK?
Oh, you don't. Well, George Parks was one of the leaders, or he was one of the heads of MUFON over in Tucson. And he actually had me do a study on various UFO paranormal stuff. And there really seemed to be, like, we looked at Travis Walton, we looked at many of the famous events. And I did a presentation at IONS and MUFON talking about this, Institute of Noetic Sciences. And it was very fascinating because we did find, to my amazement, a strong correlation to paranormal events in these astrological windows, if you will. Well, we just had one. December 21st, we had a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And this is an era now that we've just entered into since the last 240 years that I believe is going to be an exceedingly high-tech revolution like we've never seen before, ever. And I think the owners, if you want to say, or the people at the top of the pyramid know this. You know, we've heard a lot about, you know, the Soroses and the Schwabs and on, all these dark forces and these bankers. And there's probably a lot we don't know. And if you know their names, it's probably not them. It's their foot soldiers. But I would say this could be getting into some very heavy otherworldly forces combined with demonic forces. But I also say something's holding this all together that's very divine. And their leash is only so long, too. And that's why I've heard people talk about there's been orbs around nuclear installations and very advanced weaponry, and afterwards it doesn't work. Something's shutting it down. Call it angels, call it extraterrestrial, maybe it's both. I've talked to Marine guys here right off the coast of Malibu. They've been tracking stuff coming in and out of the ocean that is phenomenally fast. It's almost exceeding propagation of anything we know of. It's almost instantaneous. We don't got anything that can do that. There's something here that's, you know, very divine, as well as these very dark forces. And I think we're witnessing that happening in this world right now. And we're likely to see this really playing itself out over the next few years. Not that the United States is just the whole world, but I think it influences it so heavily. It's going to be very interesting. This is a front row seat to some pretty bizarre stuff here over the next couple of years.
There
pretty
is.
Bizarre.
And we all know that the technology that's been hidden away from us for so long is technology that could really be helpful. We know they've militarized it all, but there's also other things that would help us with health issues and free energy, so that we could clean up the planet. But it's not being released. And I was so hoping that President Trump was going to declassify a lot of these UFO documents, and before he left office, unfortunately, he did not. So I know Biden will never do that, and neither will Harris. So we're done with any of that coming from them. So here's a prediction somebody made that came on the show, and I mentioned it to you before we went live. PK and I were pretty horrified when this person said it, but given everything else that's happening, it could happen. Now, he predicted that we would see a war on our soil, that we would be invaded by another country. Could be China. I think the chart you just did before the show indicated it may very well be China.
It could be, yeah.
And then
I hear, I know there's mysterious stuff going on right now. The military has huge battle groups off of both coasts right now. There's all these freighter ships that are unusually parked up and down the whole California southern coast. I've had reports of it, and people have told me we see it, and that's from here to San Diego. And there's also, it's very common because there's a lot of bases here to see military and naval activity here, but it's been unusually high ever since the election, unusually high, ever since, I would say, the middle of November forward. And I hear there's full battle groups, not just aircraft carriers coming in and out, for more food and such, but they're literally full battle groups and submarine groups. And there's been a huge buildup. Like the Virginia-class submarines, they say, oh, well, we got one of them done. No, I hear they got 17 of them done. And that's rumor, but I think that may be true. And those are like Hunt for the Red October. They could park right off the coast, and they don't even know we're there. So there's something really big going on, and I think they planned it, just like we've seen all the other major wars. They're funded, and then they happen. And, we've got some really nice guys who think that, we should cull half the population. And it's,
they're going to do it.
As long as it's not them, right?
Right.
Well, they could. The key is there going to be a divine intervention, and not to sound trite, but I really believe we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, and we're all going to body, or as I call it, take the pipe sooner or later. But I would say, we're certainly here for a reason. This is a profound time. There's no doubt about that. It really is. And I hope we don't see a war like that. There is a strong possibility something like that could happen over this next year.
And then what was next
it'll be allowed to happen.
Was even more frightening, which because usually when we talk about extraterrestrials on this show, we don't encounter people talking about them in a real negative way, except once in a while people talk about reptilians aren't so great, but there's good and bad in them too. But this time, this person predicted an invasion, a hostile invasion that would be deadly to a lot of people and would present themselves as 6 to 7 foot tall insectoids. These are not the pretty Pleiadians that we've all come to know and love. Not them. Oh. So, and when I questioned this person further about it, why would they do that? What's the point? Okay, we've been left alone supposedly for so long. Why would they be here? What he said was interesting and very concerning, that this is coming from a group in Antarctica which is wanting to form the Fourth Reich. Now, we all know that a lot of the Nazis went down to Antarctica where they had a base and they had access to advanced technology. This person also said they have a base off-world and that they're going to be inviting these hostiles in to help them to take over the planet because they, in and of themselves, don't have the numbers. Could that be the Twilight Zone experience that you're talking about?
I hope not.
I
know
too.
Admiral Byrd, way back, I think it was in the late 40s, had been funded. And it's interesting, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, Russia, and many countries are scrambling down to Antarctica because of some very mysterious stuff. And there's supposed to be a hole that goes down into the earth. I've heard all kinds of stories about that inner Earth theory, and I think there's something to it. I guess, that's what I get too. I get if it happens, it's not going to happen to the severity that we think, and it may not even be publicly exposed. I could be wrong, but I'm looking at a chart right now. In other words, it's not going to happen to the severity that he said. Now, I hope the chart I'm reading is right, but it leans a little more towards, if it does, it's likely to be more in a stealthy way behind the scenes. We hear all this stuff about stuff underground. People have reported explosions, all kinds of crazy stuff and noises. There's a lot going on this planet that...
people disappearing, never to be seen again. Yeah, we've had all of that. Now, I will mention also that Wernher von Braun, he also predicted that this would happen. But the reason he said that all of this was going to happen was to scare us out of our wits so that we would accept being under one world order. And he said, beware, because these are false flag operations that are designed to evoke this type of emotion so that you don't feel safe anywhere and that you would accept a new world order.
I mean, even Reagan was warning about this kind of stuff. And,
right.
Remember the movie V, the TV series V?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and Reagan, was quite adamant about that. I know I grew up in northern Wisconsin, and I can tell you, call me crazy, but I've had motorcycles shut off. The batteries were completely inert of electricity, sparked them with like a wrench across the positive negative terminals, not even an electron in them. And after those things left, next morning, boom, started right up. I've had missing time. I've seen things. I was actually riding one day with the guy who used to be my high school principal or my grade school principal, and we had an orb tracking us. And, this is a pretty rational guy. He's actually a really well-known guy. And Andy Anderson in northern Wisconsin. And the stuff I've experienced, even my grandmother back in 1907, she was telling me the stuff that she saw, like fireballs coming through the house on the farm. This is nothing new. This stuff, I think they've been around here for a long, long time.
Oh, definitely. They have.
Yeah.
They have. There's no doubt in what you're saying is absolutely true. It's just in terms of being shown to a large population, so there's no denying it. That's something we haven't had. Some school children, where they've had entire schools see UFOs, has been an interesting report in Australia and Africa. But I'm talking about something in this country that there's no denying. So it will be. It sounds like a very tumultuous time. What about health? Because we've been dealing with this COVID thing. What do you see happening in the future with that?
I think it's going to go by latest March. I'll get hate mail for this, and I know a lot of people have had issues with COVID, so I'm not saying it isn't real, but I really think it backed off last May, and the numbers have been converted more to be accelerated because there is no more flu. I've talked to people I'm not saying COVID isn't real, but now forget the flu. You don't have it, okay? You only got COVID. And they've overwhelmingly had doctors who have come out and said what they've said in some of the alternative treatments. And some of them in Europe, I've heard they've gotten their license pulled. So I'm not saying COVID isn't real. I think it's been utilized to great benefit with this political situation and this election. And I also think it's being used by the globalists to, I won't be surprised if Biden comes out with a hammering order to shut everything down for a period longer to finish taking out all of the non-conglomerate businesses, especially in the food industry, because then Monsanto can supply everything and add whatever they need to it. And I really think, not to sound conspiratorial, but, it's not what they want is organic food on every street corner. And it's kind of a shame that, these kinds of powers are coming down on us. But the good news is, I think if we get through the next couple of years, we might come out of this in a way that isn't easy, but I think it may, we might come out the other end of the funnel possibly better than we think.
That's
if
good
the
news.
forces of good are behind us.
Definitely could use
and I believe
that.
they are.
Yeah. I think one of the faults of human nature, unfortunately, whether this was always the case or is more the case now, I don't know. People don't seem to think it's a problem unless it affects them. So,
of course, it's always been that way.
The censorship is a good example of that. Well, they're censoring these conservatives, so I don't care. I'm a liberal, right? So, and then all of a sudden, what they don't realize is, hey, do it to them, they're going to do it to you. It's not something that people see or accept easily. I think it's a lot of the attitude that allowed Hitler to come to power. So it's an unfortunate mistake that we make as people when we see it happening to our next door neighbor and we don't think it could happen to us. It can.
Right.
That's why we need to join forces on this.
The other eerie thing is they could bring in forces. You know, the military has technologies. They don't need to search your house. They can see everything you got in it. The spectrometry. They have tools.
True.
They can
so
say,
true.
well, your gun's over there on that shelf. Well, how do you know? I don't have a gun. Yes, you do. It's right up over there. We see it. Do you want us to kick in the door and come and get it? Oh, no. Okay, all right. Here it is. So if they want to take them, I think they're going to do this stealthy and slow. I don't think they're just going to do it all at once. I could be wrong. But I think they'll erode it away with laws that keep the herd happy. But this is a time where clearly a lot of people are very, very upset, and with good reason. You know, I really think those numbers of 74 million are quite shy from what I could see in the charts. If I'm reading it right, I'll bet it was way over 100 million on the votes. And they don't care.
Voted for Trump, you mean?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, people will laugh at me for saying that. Oh, how dare you? You know, you're a Trump lover. No, I'm not. I'm just reading the chart. You know, I'm just being neutral, because who I really like politically, I'm not going to say. Okay, I'm just going to say I try and keep neutral so that I don't put my own bias in it. And it's not easy to do, especially when you're dealing with worldly things. It's much easier for me with a client because I'm dealing with one issue. If someone says, hey, I've got, you know, a particular issue, that's a much more focused and narrow and less complex issue. When you're dealing with global stuff like this that affects not just this country but the entire globe, it's pretty heavy duty. And I think there's forces above astrology. I really do. And I think they're angelic. I think they're demonic. And I think they're very, very powerful. And, you know, there's a lot of merit to, and this isn't just, you know, well-wisher type thing. I think what you said earlier, Patricia, and is that when we stay focused and have faith, you know, that's what you hear about all the great spiritual leaders throughout history, is they always said thoughts are literally things. They're elementals. Dr. Emoto proved that with water. And even though you might say, yeah, but, you know, the alligators are surrounding me. Well, that might be. But on the other hand, we're not the physical beings we think we are. And no matter what, I think our collective, you know, focus on that has a big impact. One of the things I think that is really going to shift this planet is the axis. And I know there's a lot of flat earthers out there, but the axis of the earth is about 23.4 degrees. And I know in Vedic astrology, one of the most central things to longevity and consciousness on this planet is the moon's nodes. It's the north and south nodes. And anyone who's heard of Vedic astrology will know that's called Rahu and Ketu, which just is the moon's north and south node. And those are the mathematical points. The sun and the moon and the earth align on the ecliptic, no matter what this universe is. And the interesting thing is, you and I and everyone drawing breath will exit the physical plane when those nodes line up in very specific conditions in our birth charts. I've seen it hundreds of times. It's astounding. I couldn't understand why my poor mother died at 47 years old. Well, in the Nadi astrology, it showed that was it. Now, she could have survived it, but she didn't. And I've seen so many others at young ages, old ages, all that, and they're out of here right when that happens. So the interesting thing is, if you change the angularity of this earth, we hear in the ancient texts, the Rig Veda, we hear in the Egyptians, we hear in the Bible, all these different texts, how people used to live to 300 years, 500 years, 700 years. I actually think that's true. And we could see an axis tip here in the next, I can't say when, but I think it's going to be in the next 100, 150, 200 years. It may be sooner. And again, that's something I don't think anybody can 100% nail down, because I think consciousness of the human race and also demonic forces combined maybe when that happens. There isn't a scientist drawing breath that can explain why we're at that angularity. It isn't gravity. There's nobody standing out there with a little string holding the earth around the sun at this angle, why our seasons, you know, change.
Yeah.
So this is very mysterious stuff. It's like the solar system is a standing wave. If anyone studied acoustics or physics, you know what a standing wave is. We're locked at this frequency of vibration. That could change in a snap of a microsecond. or it might change slowly. But when it does, we're going to see a huge shift. And I think if the demonic forces move too hard, something's going to make that happen. And that's probably far beyond what anybody's going to be able to directly call. But I think that's another card in the deck that could be played here in any time in the near future.
But break that down for us. So what you're saying is that, if the demonic forces push too hard, then it could snap. What could snap? So what could happen?
Well, I mean, anything could happen, but that's one thing that I really find is an amazing source of knowledge in the ancient Vedantic, Vedic, or you could say Nadi astrology, is where the angularity of the moon, the sun, and the earth all combine. It affects every living thing on this planet. It's even talked about in many of the ancient scriptures and in the Bible, especially in the ancient Hebraic texts, where literally death is built in to everything. Everything on this planet has a beginning and a middle and an end. Well, it seems to be directly related to these eclipse points at how they line up at the inception of every soul, plant, living thing. Now, of course, mineral, animal, and vegetable things all are at different rates of acceleration and death. But this is really a bizarre thing, because when somebody steps back, I don't know if you guys know Dr. Claude Swanson. He and I have had these conversations. He lives in Tucson. He wrote the Synchronized Universe and a couple other really good books. And, physicists, all the quantum guys are scratching their heads going, something really smart is holding all this atomic energy together. It's way more divine than we know. And I think fear is a thing that these demonics and extraterrestrials that are evil play on. And if we realize that we're really, we're not these lives, though we are. I mean, if you think reality isn't real, hit yourself in the hand with a hammer. But on the other hand, we are not who we've been taught we are. We've been lied to consciously. The whole system of society keeps and forces are keeping us from knowing that we're really spiritual beings. And according to the Rig Veda and many other texts, we could incarnate thousands and thousands of times. And I think we do, not only maybe on this planet, but many others. So, just becoming consciously aware of our own power, I think has a lot of effect on how the collective consciousness of the human race works.
Well, I agree.
What they
but
just
here's
pulled
the
off
thing.
might be something that helps that.
Yeah, I would hope so. I mean, I agree with you, and I think, yes, we are much more powerful than we realize. There's ways of getting more in touch with that and owning it. But I also have a question. Okay, so we know we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. You talk about the owners. I don't get the feeling that they're human. Are they?
Well, there's a lot of evidence that they might not all be. And, there also seems to be blends. Very weird stuff. I'll never forget, I was studying an ancient text with somebody, and I won't mention. And this is the most bizarre thing that ever happened to me. We were studying some very ancient Aramaic and Hebrew, and I couldn't figure, because it's very old dialect. And the guy had his hand up there on the table, and all of a sudden I saw it morph into a claw. And I thought, okay, that's just my imagination. Except he saw that I saw it, and then he put it under the table. And I went, okay, that's not my imagination. And he got really weird with me after that. So, we've all heard of David Icke and all this stuff, and there's some trippy stuff going on here. There's no reality. There's only really perception. And this is why I love, again, the ancient Nadi astrology, because it's poking holes into that whole realm of just who the heck are we and what are we doing here? I see these charts where some folks, my God, the horrible karma they're bearing. And other ones, you go, well, this guy could do anything, or this person could do anything to anyone else, and they seem to get away with it. So it's like, why is that? And it's in the charts. So there's something very special going on this planet. Which comes full circle back to what you were saying before. I keep getting, they're not going to allow an all-out nuclear war or some kind of a catastrophic ending.
No, I don't think that that's going to be allowed either. But we forget, excuse me, we are sovereign beings. We're sovereign. We don't know that. We're acting like slaves. We're being treated like slaves. So I think that's one of the biggest...
We've been programmed like them.
Need to, yeah. That's one of the biggest obstacles for humans today, is that we, excuse me, do not understand our own sovereignty, and we do act like slaves. We're certainly in a slave system right now. It doesn't matter what color you are, doesn't matter what religion you are. This is a slave system. And when you talk about the owners, I love that you brought that up, Jeff, because I know, PK, you and I agree on this completely. That's what's going on. So it's very hard to try to live a life of sovereignty and amidst a prison and imprisoning consciousness situation all around you. But I guess that's why you're on the show, is to help us and our audience to make sense of this. And I know your services are fabulous, and your insights are what give people even more power to understand themselves and to get past some of this. It's very difficult.
Well, thanks for the compliment, but I'm a student of all this too. I'm not God, but I certainly try and help as much as I can to unravel the veil. Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, and I think it's one of the most intriguing things to us as human beings. It's just, who the heck are we, And one of the texts I love the most is it's a text called the Share Hagilgum, which actually, our fine bearded men in Rome back in the 2nd or 5th century threw these doctrines out the window of reincarnation. And original Christianity actually had it in there. And, these were the bearded men that were murdering each other to make sure Christians would believe what they wanted them to believe for the next 1,500 years. And this is proof. You can go back and look. They've omitted so many texts. And the Share Hagilgum specifically speaks about how we are fragments of fractured souls that come to this particular planet, this particular dimension, to purify and rectify the negative elements that we've interblended with. And it's very mysterious stuff. And astrology seems to be the lower end of the matrix of how that may have happened, or at least it's representative of the influences on us. So, modern astrology, I call it love, light, and cluelessness. Everyone's a Pisces or an Aries. And God, anything could be further from the truth when you really look at this older stuff. It's like, whoa. They actually speak about the angelic courts that attach the soul to the embryo conception. And then at first breath, it is the angelic imprint from the celestial influences that you are stuck with during this incarnation. And so that's not us. That's what we came here to do, which is very interesting. And when you get back into aliens and world wars and, like my grandmother was telling me, her brother, I think he was at the time 19, gets the letter in the mail. You're going to war. Well, I don't want to go to war. I want to stay on the farm. No, you're going to war. So Uncle Sam's taking, and next thing you know, he's over there, ducking bombs in trenches in Europe, So this happened to so many people. You look at all of our lives and how varied and contrasted they are. It's really bizarre, the fate really and destinies of us all.
Years ago, I think it was back in the 70s, there were a series of books that everybody fell in love with at the time. Every single book hit the New York Times bestseller list, #1. For a long time, and it was the Carlos Castaneda books. And
good.
That really touched a nerve with people where they began to see, wait a second, what I'm living and what I'm seeing is not reality. And the way he wrote those books, you got drawn into this other world where you learned how to dream, where you learned how to stalk, all of these things that a spiritual warrior learns to do. Those books are timeless, and I know there was a lot of criticism around them, but I'm going to dust my copies off and bring them out again.
One to that. The one I would add to that, and you're right, those are amazing. The one I love to also recommend. It's a book called The Magus of Strovolos, and it's about a healer who lived in the city of Strovolos on the island of Cyprus, right off the coast of Jerusalem and Syria and south of Turkey and all that. And he was a miraculous astral traveler and healer who was documented by a man named Kyriakos Markides. He was actually told by his priests when he grew up in Strovolos not to go around this man, for he must have cohorts with the spirits and the devils. And he ended up on a sabbatical after he'd moved to the United States in the 80s. He went and met this man, ran into him, healing people. Totally. I mean, this guy would make John of God's work look, of course, I know he's been, caught with all kinds of crazy stuff, but this guy makes most healers look like kindergarten. I mean, unbelievable. Called The Magus of Strovolos. We had somebody on the show who, I don't know if it was the writer of that book, but somebody who wrote about this. It was fascinating. Yeah, that I know who you're talking about. Yeah, that was one of his disciples, right? And but I can tell you that particular book is a glimpse into the world of, I think, the way it is. And he talks about reincarnation, and so does the Vedantic stuff, the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda. I don't know if you've heard of these, and then the Samhitas, and it's just the Artha Veda. It's astounding, this stuff, where it's kind of cryptic, but oh my God, when you look into it, you see how much this world, especially technology, is blinding us to who we really are. And it's fascinating to read The Magus of Strovolos. If I had an extra $1 million, I would probably throw that out of helicopters and say, you got to read this before you die. And when you're done, hand it to the next guy or the next woman, because it's so amazing to raise your awareness and consciousness. It doesn't change the insanity of the world, changes our perspective to it, which is really the greatest power of all, because we're powerless to effectuate a change with Trump, Biden, Harris, and the owners. We can't really do it directly, but I'll tell you, our reaction to it is the most powerful thing in the world, in the universe, and that is, that's what I always try and do in readings is hey, you take this energy and you look at it a different way. I had a psychiatrist once. He said to me, Jeff, he says, I don't know why, but he says, I moved to this location. He says, I actually got myself on meds. And I said, well, you moved right on a Moon-Pluto line. He said, well, what does that mean? I said, well, it's like fingernails on the chalkboard, exceedingly intense emotions. And he read it, a very intelligent man. He said, well, I got this. He says, now I know it's not me. So he threw the meds in the garbage can. Of course, he couldn't move because the kids are in school and the wife, and bought a house, and she loves the shopping and all that. But he changed his perception of that energy to where it was like the art of war. You change the energy towards, okay, I can't change it. It's not easy, but at least now I understand that I'm standing in a river and that I can't, jump up and down without getting swept down the river. So he changes his attitude. And that's the way I like to look at all this. And maybe how we should look at it the next few years is that we're in a current right now, a very coercive and pushy, and you could say tricky energy that is going to really try and pull off a lot of very, very, you could say, sneaky stuff. And I don't think we need to have astrology to tell us that that's a high probability with who's sitting in the District of Criminals, right? I call Washington the District of Criminals. Oh, that's great. Because it's really
I love that.
Yeah, it
hey,
used to be
Jeff,
District of
what
Columbia,
about, you did mention Monsanto and food. Are you suggesting to people that we need to grow more of our own food so that they're not in charge of our food supply so much?
I mean, that's certainly a good idea. I'm not suggesting anybody do anything. I would just say that, I think aquaponics and things like that are really intelligent. I mean, people used to grow all their own food. That's, I think, a really smart idea. Have you ever heard of Anastasia, the ringing cedars of Russia?
Yes.
She is. I love her. In fact, I'm seriously thinking about going up there by her. But I'm kidding. But I want to move in up there in her glade. But talk about an amazing lady. She wrote the series, or actually Vladimir Merge wrote the book. She actually had him write it. She's lived, and her family has lived for, she claims, thousands of years in the Siberian tundras up in Russia. And oh my God, there's another conscious raising series of books, and she speaks about how she astral travels to other planets, and she lives with. She literally sleeps. They say, well, how do you keep warm up here in the Siberian tundra? Well, she sleeps with the bears. They hug her and keep decorating under the fur. It's amazing. And
that is
people
amazing.
think this is crazy. But you read these books and you just walk away going, wow, what mind warp trip am I in? I mean, this whole world is so diverse. There's so much going on here.
Well, there is. And
it's
unfortunately, we've all been caught in this political drama that has been going on, and it's been very draining in a lot of ways. There's been a lot of emotional highs and lows for everybody in this. It's been very difficult to navigate, to try to sort out the truth from lies, and it has not been
really
a lot
been
of
tedious.
fun. Yeah,
nope.
Exactly.
It's been really a blur. And, I think what it did prove is you see how our conscious minds are. If you go to the alternate universe, which I just pick a few channels on mainstream media, or talk to people, everyone has their perception of reality. And, if you listen to Hate Orange Man News, you will hate Orange Man. That's what they call Trump. And if you listen to other channels, you're going to be in that, in that program. And I think, it's really interesting for me to kind of stand back and look at it all. It's like a multi-program running here of reality.
Well, it's a lot like an extension of MK Ultra, and just repeating things over and over again about anybody, especially President Trump, who they love to hate. It makes you believe it, and a lot of people don't understand that, and they watch this stuff day in and day out, and they don't realize that this is MK Ultra, and they are being programmed. So a lot of people who we've normally found to be logical and reasonable, all of a sudden, that's not who they are. And we're like, what happened to the person we used to know? So it's this. It's the media, which is the worst virus, much worse than COVID. So they are programming people. That's why I don't watch that stuff anymore.
Yeah, the owners have cracked the whip. They really have, and they proved it today. They really did. And, it's the way it is. You saw Lindsey Graham almost in fear make the proclamation that Joe Biden is the new president. And I mean, that event at the Capitol was the trigger point, and it was really used to full maximum effect. And I think they're still going to use it. They're coming down. It's going to be very interesting to see where all this information spills out here over the next couple of months with the Neptune squaring Mars and the opposition to Neptune for the United States throughout this year. It's going to be really a bizarre year, and I think on a lot of fronts. And we're either going to see this country end up in a whole nother way and may not even exist as we know it by 2023, or it's going to, depending on what happens, and I think that's hanging in the balance on a lot of things, it could also go the other way and become something we really want.
Well, let's hope for the best. Now, Jeff, people can find you at your website, right? jeffharman.com?
Yeah, that's the best way.
That's the best way?
H-A-R-M-A-N,
okay. Because I know people have been texting me, how do I get a hold of Jeff? Okay, so that's where you go, everybody, jeffharman.com. Jeff, can't thank you enough for a fascinating evening. And I hope we can all get some good rest tonight. And let's hope for the best.
You've definitely helped put some of our minds at ease with what you've had to say, Jeff.
Yeah,
well, I mean, I can just tell you what the charts say, And,
well, you did a great
really
job, and we so appreciate it. We're going to have you come back, and unfortunately we have to end the show right now. But thank you again, Jeff. It's been great. And We'll talk again
my
real
honor.
soon, I'm sure. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks for having me. You bet. Bye.
Oh, thanks a lot, Jeff.
Bye-bye. Next
Best
week,
to you,
everybody,
right?
we'll be back
Bye-bye.
with another show, and we have Maria coming back. Maria Shaw, remember her? And she'll be joining us very shortly. But next week, you're going to hear from her and her husband. So join us again. Until then, see you on the Blue Highway. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for another radio adventure with Supernatural Girls.